Hello y'all, how you doing? This is Dr. Hodonu, and today I'm going to be talking about the cell cycle. Now, I do hope that you've read chapter 8 of your textbooks. If you haven't read chapter 8, please read chapter 8. I'm only going to talk about a few of the points in chapter 8. So let's talk about the cell cycle. Every cell of your body, whether it's a skin cell or a toenail cell or an intestinal cell, has to go from a young stage to an adult stage. The stages a cell goes through are known as the stages of the cell cycle. That's when a cell goes from a stem stage to an adult stage. Okay, so it's basically the growth and development of the steps of a cell. Now, there are three main steps of the cell cycle. Number one is the first stage is what we call interphase. The second stage is what we call mitosis. And the third stage is what we call cytokinesis. Interphase, the first stage of a cell, is the stage where a cell performs its usual functions. That's DNA synthesis, protein synthesis, growth, and just regular function of a cell. So if you have a cell that's responsible for filtration in the kidneys, and that's where it performs all of that filtration. So interphase is when a cell performs its usual functions. A cell is mostly at interphase. Most of the lifespan of a cell is spent in interphase. Then number two, we have mitosis. Mitosis is the second stage of the cell cycle, and mitosis refers to division of the nucleus. So if you remember, a cell has a cytoplasm, and inside the cell you have a nucleus. Do you remember the function of the nucleus? Yes, it contains DNA. So this is important because the nucleus divides, means the DNA divides, and DNA can be replicated and passed on to other cells. Okay, so we have interphase, which is the first stage of the cell cycle, mitosis, which is the division of the nucleus, and then we have cytokinesis, which is the division of the cytoplasm. Cyto meaning cell division. Okay, so let's talk about interphase. Let's start with interphase briefly. Interphase has three stages. We have the G1 phase, the S phase. Sorry about the S. I'm just going to erase it. We have the S phase, and we have the G2 phase. Okay, G refers to gap. Call this gap. And S refers to synthesis. Okay, gap 1, gap 2. All right. So what happens in the gap phases? In the G1 phase, as part of the interphase, the cell doubles its number of organelles. It accumulates materials necessary for DNA synthesis and makes a decision whether to divide or not. There are cells that when they do not divide, they go into a phase called the G0 phase, which is an arrested phase. They just stay in that phase and they do not divide, they do not do anything, they just stay in that phase. Okay? And then we have the synthesis phase. When a cell passes the G1 phase and enters into a synthesis phase, which is where the DNA is replicated. Okay, this is where DNA synthesis occurs and DNA is replicated. All right, and then we have the G2 phase. The G2 phase is the stage following the synthesis phase, and this leads to the onset of mitosis, and it's typically where the proteins necessary for mitosis are synthesized. There are certain proteins necessary for mitosis that are synthesized at the G2 phase. Okay, now let's talk about